Hey guys, coming at me another movie for guys, continuing my 31 days of horror movie reviews. This is day 6. I know it should be day 7. I was gonna try to watch 2 films today, just didn't get a chance to. But I will promise you guys, over the weekend, I will definitely catch up and I will definitely make it to 31 movies. I know you guys are like, oh, you're on the road to only 30 movies. I will make it to 31, I promise you guys. Even though I might not, it might not be 2 a day. I definitely this weekend I'm gonna try to watch at least 2, and hopefully that works out because I definitely want to, be on the right track because I am kind of behind a day by a day. But with that said, because I want to watch 2 movies, I wanted to watch a shorter movie, and there really wasn't another movie that came to mind except for this one. This is a movie that I've been very interested in for quite a while. I've heard some incredible things about, and I was definitely interested in seeking it out. And it's a movie that I didn't really know much about going into it until I watched a review of it, and that's really it. But that is the 1932 horror. I would consider this a horror movie, but I will talk about how it's not exactly what you expect from a horror movie, and that's the 1932 horror film Freaks. Yes, I got Freaks from my library. You guys can also watch this movie on YouTube. The Freaks is a movie I was definitely very interested in for quite a few reasons. I've heard many people say that it is a very different kind of horror film. That's a movie that was ahead of its time, and it's regarded as a cult classic, and a lot of people say it's a lot better than, people have made it out to be, and that should be more loved, and especially with American Horror Story Freak Show, that just ended, that also really sparked my interest in this, because I'm like, okay, maybe what did they borrow from this, and I have to say that Freaks really didn't disappoint me at all. Freaks is exactly what I've been wanting for 31 Days of Horror, because it is the first film in 31 Days of Horror to be an absolute masterpiece. I don't see a single problem in this movie. I think this movie is perfect, and I really stand by everything that this movie is trying to say. The basic plot to this movie, which a lot of people could say that the movie is about a day in the life of just these freaks, but it does have a specific plot. While there are other subplots in the movie, it does have one main plot, and that basically focuses on this girl, Cleopatra, who is this trapeze woman. She works in a trapeze act for this, freak show, basically. And one day there's this dwarf man, Hans, who basically really wants to be with her and basically marries her, and he really loves her and everything, but his friends start to realize that she might really only want to be with him for his money and might actually not love him and even think of him as a freak, and he basically has to make a big decision here on whether or not he really does, on whether or not she really does love him, and if he wants to do something about it, and if they can even trust her. And that basically is a plot of Freaks, and right, it's a very compelling plot, definitely. It's a very simple plot, but it's a lot more than just the plot. I don't really think this is a movie that is just based on a plot. First of all, let me just say that everything this movie is doing is great. The acting in this movie you can't really fault anyone for, because if you guys know, all of the freaks, as they called it in this movie, are real. They were all real people with real deformities. They all had these things going on with them, and I thought that was a very wise choice, because if you were to cast people in these roles, it would probably be seen as very offensive, and that's definitely not something that they would want to come across as. So there's a lot of people to talk about. I'm only going to talk about a few people. Olga Balconova as Cleopatra, who obviously, she is the only normal human in the cast. She's the only one in the cast that doesn't have a deformity, of the main cast, that is. There are 2 other people, Frazo and Venus, they are in the movie. They don't really have a lot to do, but, basically, the character of Cleopatra I find very interesting, because at first you think she really does love Hans, that she really does want to be with him, but then you see that behind their back, she's ridiculing them, she's making fun of them, she sees them as weird, and it's very interesting the way they portray her character. You're not really sure if, you're supposed to like her. She's not a very likable character, but at the same time, you can't really fault her for the way she's reacting. I mean, obviously, they're different to her, and because they're different, she's freaking out. She hasn't seen this before, she doesn't know what to do about it, and she doesn't really know how to handle it, and I definitely really like that about her plot. I thought she did a very good job, and they did a good job of not just making her a bitchy character. They actually gave her a compelling story that I definitely really liked, and I thought overall she did a very good job. Um, then you have, then you have, what's his name? Then you also have Henry Victor as Hercules, who is the strong man that Cleopatra actually does really care for. And the interesting thing about the relationship is that you wonder why she is with him when he's also has deformity and Hans doesn't, and you really see that there really is no difference, but that Hercules acts as if he's no different than the other freaks. He makes fun of them, he ridicules them, he's constantly making these jokes about them, and he has this laugh about them. I mean, it's really sad stuff, and you definitely see these characters as very cynical, but you can understand why, and that's kind of how the common human was back then. I definitely really like the way they represented that. It really goes back to a time where things were not as accepting as they were, and you really do see that in this movie. However, by far the best performances in the movie are the ones of the so-called freaks. I thought they all were fantastic in this movie, mainly because they can relate to what's going on, and they've made a very wise decision casting freaks, because you have to figure the subject, the conflict they go through in this movie is probably a conflict they go through in their everyday lives. Especially Harry Earls as Hans, who, yes, he does have a voice that makes him sound like a little boy. He has this dwarf syndrome that makes him very short and look like a dwarf, but I was able to take him seriously. I really was, because I didn't see him as just a freak. I saw him as an actual person. And that's something I think is very well done in this movie. They get you to care for these people. They don't just show them to you as freaks. They show them as actual people. You see that Hans really does want to be with Cleopatra, but he also just overall just really wants to be accepted. This is a world where they're not very accepted very well, and this is a time period when they were ridiculed with. But the thing about Hans the most is that he can be the nicest guy, and he looks like a very harmless guy, but if you piss him off, he will go off on you, he will call you out for it, and it's not going to end well. That's something I definitely really liked about him. He did a very good job with that, and he was definitely very, very menacing at times. I mean, he is a very cheerful person, but when he gets pissed off, he's very menacing, and that's something I definitely really admired, is how menacing he was. And also, Daisy Earles as Frida, I really liked her character as well. She sticks by Hans. You can tell she is the one that truly does love him, and I thought overall she did a very good job. I also really liked the Hilton Twins. If you guys know Daisy and Violet, if you guys know the musical Sideshow, these are the twins based off of that, Daisy and Violet. I thought they did a very good job. I didn't know they were in this movie, but they worked with them very, very well. They had a very interesting storyline. Theirs is kind of played for laughs and kind of shown how they are connected and what they can sense, and I thought that was very interesting, but they did a very good job as well. I thought everyone in this movie was really good, and they all really did a fantastic job. Now, the directing by Todd Browning is, I think, the definition of a horror movie ahead of its time. Definitely. When this movie first came out, people absolutely hated it. People said it was offensive. They said it was too shocking. And that's something I think is definitely very interesting. In fact, it was so shocking that the movie had to be cut down a lot, which I'll get to in the editing. But I will say the marketing for this movie I think is pretty terrible, because you see the tagline in this movie, it says, "Can a fully grown woman truly love a midget?" And it makes you think this movie is just some soap opera. And while there is a love triangle in this movie, it's so much more than that. What this movie really is trying to show, and like I said, this is a horror film, but it's much more of a dialogue-driven film. There's not really a lot of scares, per se. It's a horror film in the sense of, this is the world. The world of the Freak Show is a horror film. It feels like something out of a horror film, and it doesn't seem real. It's willing to address an issue that is very important, and a lot of people are thinking, okay, well, why are they portraying these freaks as these, weird people? Because that's how they were. It's making you look at these freaks and trying to not make you scared of them. It's something that I think is definitely very interesting, because, yeah, you are a little bit thrown off. I mean, when I first got introduced to Hans, sure, I was thrown off. It took me a little bit to get, really care about his character, but yeah, I was a bit thrown off by his voice, definitely, and that's something I thought they did very well with this movie. Is the way they constructed that. And it's really about the people's reactions and how they react to these freaks. I mean, they treat them like little kids. They treat them like probably like slavery. I mean, they don't treat them like normal people. And again, it's probably the common thing to do. We as humans tend to ridicule people because they're different than us, and this movie really goes with that in the sense of the directing. From the moment this movie begins, you can tell it's gonna be a very information-filled movie, and a lot of people say this movie at points feels like a documentary, and I can understand that because I feel like some of the things that happen in this movie actually had happened to the freaks in this movie. I thought they did a very good job with that. I thought the directing was definitely spot on, and I overall definitely really loved that. And I also liked how he tried not to dramatize things. He basically told a very straightforward story, and that was something I really enjoyed, definitely. However, when the movie is very suspenseful at points, definitely very suspenseful. The screenplay by Todd Robbins, I thought, was definitely the strongest thing about this movie, though, is the screenplay. Because the screenplay is, like I said, very, very ahead of its time. It's very ahead of its time. It's very scary, but it's not scary like jump scares. It's scary because of just the crowd's reaction. And seeing that this was an actual time period that we lived in, that this actually happened to people, it's pretty disgusting to think about, honestly. It leaves me with an ill taste in my mouth just thinking that this actually happened to these freaks and that they actually had to go through this. It's very sad to think about, but it was a time period that actually happened, unfortunately, and that's why it's quite sad, and I definitely really love about this movie is the way they portrayed that. That's something I definitely really loved. The story overall I found very compelling. I thought was very interesting because you have a man that just wants to be treated like a normal person. Besides his height, he is a man. He acts like a man. He acts like a full-grown man. He is a full-grown man. He just doesn't look like one. He doesn't. He's much different, but you kind of take him seriously. And the movie actually does you get something that I really do admire. This is not a movie that anyone that's not that's not mature should watch. If you are not mature, you're not going to like this movie. You're going to probably find it funny. And if you find it funny, then you basically have just gone with what the movie's telling you not to do. The real thing about this movie is that when we see someone that's different than us, we should not ridicule them. We should instead try to embrace the difference in them and accept them for who they are. And especially now we live in a society that's very accepting of people and like differences like that. It's interesting to go back to a time period when that wasn't very well liked and that you were ridiculed if you were in a certain way, and that's something I definitely really thought was very interesting. The cinematography is also fantastic to this movie. I can't really say too much about them because, again, these are real freaks, and I'm pretty sure this was filmed like a real freak show and things like that, so I can't really say, oh, it's amazing photography and that it's mind-blowing because there wasn't too much, but I thought they did a very good job with that, and I definitely really enjoyed that. The movie also is a little bit of everything. Some of the plots are pretty funny, like the Daisy Violet stuff is pretty hilarious, I will say that. I thought there was a pretty hilarious plot, what we got there. But the movie also wasn't afraid to get suspenseful, especially the climax of this movie. Holy shit, it's very intense. I didn't know what was going to happen, and I definitely really liked that. While you also care for these freaks, you also kind of fear them, though, because when they get upset, they rally together, they group together, and this is exactly what I wanted from American Horror Story Freak Show. What we never really got from that show is seeing the inner turmoil that they went through, and how even though we're supposed to care about them, we're also supposed to, be terrified of them. And that didn't really happen in American Horror Story Freak Show because they weren't that threatening. They really weren't. They were threatening in the beginning, but things just got really stupid. I mean, all the love triangles. There's one in this movie, and it's not to the extent of American Horror Story Freak Show where they focused on that and nothing else. And I hope that doesn't happen in Hotel. I hope Hotel is a lot more focused, and I hope they don't just focus on a love triangle because it's stupid when they do that. But I also thought the score, which isn't in this movie a lot, was very good. I definitely really appreciate the score of this movie. It very much feels like you're going into this world that's very scary, and I definitely really like the way they handled that. Also, the editing to this movie is very interesting. The movie is 64 minutes long, and that's obviously very unusual for any movie, really. Yeah, I'm not kidding. It's an hour and 2 minutes. I was shocked when I found that out. Reason being is because there was an original cut to this movie, but it was deemed too shocking to be released and will no longer exist. So no one has ever seen that cut. This is the cut that people have seen, and you know what? I thought it was perfect because it didn't need to be any longer. It needed to be the length it was, and I thought it was the perfect length, honestly, and I was fine with that, definitely. Also, the way they construct ending of this movie in the beginning scene is very well done, and I definitely really like that. I thought they definitely did a very good job with that final scene, which that final scene had a lot to say about the world, had a lot to say about the overall feel of this movie, and really left you with a very gripping, powerful message. Also, if you guys watch this movie, on the DVD, there's an option to watch an introduction. Watch that introduction because it really shows what what they went through. I mean, it says in the introduction that even someone that was just different and didn't have the same lifestyle, they were considered different and were ridiculed for it. And it's horrifying to think about. It's horrifying because no human being should ever have to be treated that way. And that really is why this movie is as scary as it is, because these are human beings. Despite them looking weird, despite them not looking like you and I, despite them having these deformities, they are human beings. It's basically if you were to go up to like a disabled person and start making fun of them. That's how they treat this in this movie. They treat it in a very serious way, and I definitely really love that. I thought he did a very good job with that, and like I said, it's a movie that's very ahead of its time, and people really did not understand it, like they do now, I think. I think definitely now people understand a lot more, but overall, guys, I really love Freaks. I think it was a fantastic movie. By far, the best classic movie I have watched so far. And I will definitely give Freaks a 5 out of 5 or an A+. It is a flawless movie that has a very powerful message that is still just as powerful today, that is even, I think, just as important today, even though we are very accepting now. It's just interesting to look back in a time period where we weren't as accepting, especially if you watch American Horror Story Freak Show. Definitely check out this movie because it does more of what that should have done. It shows why, freak shows were important and why they decided to focus on that subject, definitely. And I think they definitely did a very good job with that in this movie. And definitely the subject matter of this movie was very good, and the idea the movie brings, I think, is very impactful. But that is my review, freaks. Hope you guys enjoyed. If you guys saw this movie you have seen, please check out this movie you haven't. Honestly, I would recommend this movie to you guys, really. I think it's a fantastic movie. I think it's very sad at times. It's also kind of funny at times, but overall, in the end of the day, it's just a great movie that's very underrated, and I wish more people would talk about it. But that's my review for Freaks. Hope you guys enjoyed. Let me know if you guys saw this movie you have seen. I will see you guys in my next video, which will be for the season premiere of Arrow, and I will see you guys for that. Okay, bye.